Welcome to EDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get the chance to chat with luminaries in EDiscovery and related areas. Welcome to EDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Sosha, Senior Vice President of Brand Awareness at Reveal. Each Friday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, I host an episode of EDiscovery Leaders Live where I get a chance to chat with EDiscovery luminaries. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select resources, and then select eDiscovery Leaders Live Cast. This week, I am pleased to have joining us Luke Smith. Luke is the founder, CEO, and head of customer delivery at LTI Legal Tech Innovations in Belgium. In terms of his experience, Luke's been in the industry for a while. Prior to founding LTI, he was at Freshfields, head of antitrust investigations in Belgium. Before that, at Latham & Watkins, and before that at Epic. Prior to that, with Hogan & Lovells in London and Linklater's before that. So Luke has a long and extensive tenure in the industry with experience both on the provider side and the law firm side. Luke, welcome.
Hi, George. Thank you for having me.
Pleased to have you here. So let's get going. One of the things I'd like to focus on, you are the first of our guests who works in a civil law system as opposed to a common law system, which we have in the United States or they have in the UK or Ireland. There are all sorts of implications when it comes to eDiscovery. Why don't we dive right in and start talking about some of the differences and what those mean?
Yeah, sure. So where I came from originally was Linklaters and Hogan Lovells in the United Kingdom. And I started working in the, eDiscovery document management world for cases in 2000. So for about 20 years ago, almost 21. And I moved to Belgium around 11 years ago. And one of the things that surprised me when I moved to the continent, or continental Europe, is the lack of discovery and disclosure that you would typically find in the UK and US systems. And this was, it took me back a little bit because in the United Kingdom, we saw large volumes when there was a litigation or a dispute, the need to collect, search, review, and then more importantly, produce these vast volumes of documents from your system into the other party's system and vice versa. And in continental Europe, things sort of play out a little bit different for lawyers. Here in continental Europe, you do have some large sort of discovery and disclosure of evidence exercises, but they're very rare. They don't happen so often. But one thing that sort of took me back a little bit was the need still to have care and attention when presenting your evidence, because here it'd be more of a trial by surprise. So the judges would liaise with their clients, the lawyers would be liaising with their clients to talk about what the dispute is, ask them for evidence, and then they would be able to sort of build their file and their sort of bundle of documents that they would use in a hearing. But there wouldn't necessarily be the need to actually hand over everything that in the universe that relates to it. It would just be the core documents that you're focusing on. And there is a need still, there is a practice to handle this documents and the evidence with care. So there's more of a sort of a forensic background experience in continental Europe versus, say, an EDiscovery background. So you would engage with a forensic evidence, digital forensic expert, and say, okay, we have this person, we have this case, we now need you to help us find the evidence, collect it in a way so it can be authenticated in case the judge or the other law firms, lawyers will ask to prove its authenticity. So I guess the knowledge of EDiscovery is less profound in continental Europe. It's, again, we a lot of the time when I first came across to Europe, I'd be referring to it as EDiscovery or EDisclosure, and a lot of the lawyers would be, well, I don't do US cases, so thank you, but I don't need your help. A lot of the time, the terminology is called a forensic search or an e-search, but in principle, it's the same thing as EDiscovery, because you have to find your evidence and your facts. So on cases where you have lawyers working with their clients who aren't able to pinpoint the evidence to you, you have to go through sometimes an exercise of collecting a wider set of documents and trying to build your case, go through the documents, find the facts, and sort of build your core bundle. But again, I think the key differences are the disclosure rules, discovery rules, is where you exchange this vast volumes of information is a little bit different in the litigation and disputes worlds.
So it sounds like whether you're in a civil law system or a common law system, ultimately you do need to present a story. You need to support that story with evidence, which means you need to figure out what story you're going to tell and what evidence you can use to support it. We have a very wide-reaching process here in the US, where attorneys can range far and wide looking for data, pull in a lot of the data. They have a lot of latitude in terms of what they go after, and also spend a lot of money on all of this. It sounds as if in Belgium, for example, the need is the same. You still need to tell a story. It needs to be a persuasive story. It needs to be supported by evidence. But the latitude is very different. You have to be much more disciplined and focused in how you find, get, and go through data. And then you only hand over a very small portion to the other side. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like you do, every now and again, you do get such a large dispute or litigation where you do have the need to cast the net very wide and find your evidence, the same as you would in the US or the UK. But these cases are much less frequent. So I guess the size of the industry and then the actual knowledge of conducting these exercises in the legal pool is much, much smaller. But the need is the same, yes.
So with the need being the same, but the latitude being much different, how do folks efficiently and effectively accomplish all of this? I mean, we know how we do it in the United States. Clearly, you have to do it a different way. How are you approaching it?
Yeah, and I've had over the years, opportunity to work with many great lawyers, and one of them was a DC competition lawyer who came across to Europe, and he coined the phrase "the Wild West." He said, "You just have no rules. You just do what you believe is right." And he said it's like the Wild West over here. So it takes a lot of care and attention because, as you appreciate, the knowledge of conducting these exercises is much smaller. And this also hurts perhaps the financial aspects of what a client may pay, because if you are forced into conducting such a large e-discovery exercise and you have dozens or tens, hundreds of custodians to investigate and collect data from and process hundreds or terabytes of data, you could be looking at a tens or hundreds of thousands of euros or dollars EDiscovery bill before the first search term or before the first page is even turned in a review. So this can sometimes make it hard from an efficiency standpoint, because before a budget can even be set, you may have even sort of ate into a lot of costs here. So you have, I guess, somewhat proportionality card. I think that is also existent in the US, in the UK too. So I would always recommend, to make things efficient, you sort of start with your key actors, the key custodians, and you pivot. You process some of their data. You start your investigation, your research into the internal documents, the evidence, at a very small scale. You don't throw hundreds of paralegals and hundreds of thousands of documents. You sort of start in sort of bite-sized chunks and then pivot based on what you've learned. If you've got lots of irrelevant documents, why are these coming back? Change your approach, pivot again, and run a new set of searches, or try some analytics, see what that yields. If the numbers are greater, responsive numbers are greater, then that's a good process. We keep doing that until perhaps the sort of the responsiveness trails off a little bit. So from a efficiency standpoint, it's definitely start small, and then from your learnings, bring more custodians in, more actors into the investigation or the review as you progress.
The EDiscovery is a portion of the activity that goes on for litigation, what we would call civil litigation, a portion of the activity that goes on in Europe. But it's by no means all of it, right? There are investigations of all matter.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little.
Yeah, so I guess since I've moved to Europe, my number of litigations, I can count on both hands, but the number of investigations now is probably, over the last 10 years, probably over 100 investigations. And this is really, the regulatory investigation work and corporate investigation work has really driven the adoption of EDiscovery in Europe. Again, these are not as frequent as a dispute may be, but they are definitely sort of rolling along now. All of the Bundeskarteller in Germany, the ACM, the Dutch, French, the Belgian competition authorities, and the European Commission has become a lot more wiser and knowledgeable on these larger exercises of uncovering evidence. And these regulatory investigations are definitely driving the discovery industry in continental Europe. One area that stands out to me is the merger clearance. So when you have two dominant companies merging in Europe, a bit like the DOJ process, the phase twos, of course the European Commission will act on this merger, and they need to approve it. They need to do a market assessment. How is this going to affect the power of this company after the merger on suppliers, consumers, people like us? Will prices go up? And so they have now used their powers to request large numbers of internal documents from the merging parties, and the law firms are responsible for taking care of this and collecting all of the evidence, the internal documents, and providing it to the regulator. Again, in Europe, they issue something called a request for information, or an RFI for short. And these RFIs are sort of a 12 or so page document. They ask for the documents to be handed over that relate to the sort of planned investments that the companies have had, actual or planned investments, the innovation, products that they're looking at implementing, how this is going to affect pricing from suppliers, customers, how it will affect certain areas within the European Union. And very often these transactions are very big, so they can also be very political, right? Because if you've got a large US company buying out a European company, maybe the president of France is not so happy about this and wants the Commission to be very thorough. So they issue these RFIs with, say, 20 or 10, 30, 20 different topics of interest that they want the law firms to look for, to search for, and hand over anything that's responsive. These RFIs normally contain a list of the employees or custodians they may want you to search, and this will be the VIPs, the head of the CEO, the head of sales, head of marketing, lots of different products and business areas, and they also target now people lower down the chain to see how they may be discussing it differently to the people at the very top. Part of these RFIs now, they've changed a lot in the last few years. This is where it gets our attention. So the EDiscovery professionals' attention is they ask for the collection logs. So when you've imaged the phones, the laptops, collected data from the email system servers, that you have to provide the logs of the collection over. When you are crafting your search terms to answer the sort of 20 questions, the areas that the topics that they are after, you have to present your search terms that you're using to find these documents. Then you have to provide now the load file, which, for a lawyer who's not done any e-discovery work, it takes you back a little bit. With the sort of classic metadata, I think that most people will be used to providing on this call. But things that I think throw the lawyers is they ask for the path of where their document originated from in the environment. So that's sort of gone are the days where the lawyers could just say to the custodians, email me everything and I'll copy it onto a USB stick and hand it over. We actually have to do this exercise in a sort of an e-discovery style fashion. So the regulators are definitely responsible for, I think, enhancing the knowledge and the need and the adoption process of e-discovery workflows, best practices, and using the technology efficiently.
Are the regulators looking for certain types of approaches when it comes to not just gathering the data, but evaluating it in order to determine what to hand over? Are they looking for certain types of technology to be used, or do they want certain types of technology not to be used?
Many of the regulators now have lawyers who have worked at law firms who have sort of moved into the sort of regulatory body. So they are perhaps familiar with the technology that can be used to search and present the results of search terms, so they can analyze them and see if the terms are producing too many hits or not. Very recently, over the last year or two, there has been some debate about whether you could use, say, predictive coding or analytics to help uncover the documents. And this will be used in, say, tandem with search terms. It's something that, of course, I'm in favor of as a technology lover, but it's somewhat quite challenging in Europe to implement, because normally these exercises need to be completed in sort of 3 to 4 weeks. Okay, you can get a little bit of an extension. But they're quite hard because where you've got sort of 20 very different topics, and you may have Spanish, Italian, French, German, and English languages in the data set. It's quite hard to recommend to lawyers we can run this predictive coding model for topic number 2, because we would have to think, okay, now we've got to run it in different languages. Do we have enough time? Do we have enough resource while we're looking at these other 19 topics in tandem? And you've got your sort of privilege reviews going on and whatnot. So it makes it a little bit hard to implement the sort of more sophisticated approaches to finding the evidence, just purely from the timeline base.
Is it lack of familiarity on the part of the lawyers that's the key barrier here?
I would say it's more in the regulator's hand. So yeah, the lawyers on the regulator's side, because they hold the cards to some extent, because now they sort of dictate a little bit about what search terms you will apply to which topic, and then you can have a discussion about amending them if they happens to use the company name as a search term, which sometimes happens, returns every document. So yeah, I guess it is a little bit an appreciation of the technology, what it can do and how it can be achieved within the time that you have, because also the regulator has the clock running. They only have a certain number of days to actually approve the transaction. Mm-hmm. So if you get bogged down in a 4-week discussion about the scores, the results of the predictive coding model, and then spending time to actually quantify the results, they lose too much time themselves, because you've got to then hand over these 500,000 documents, and then they're going to have to run their searches and conduct their reviews as well within that sort of 30-odd day time period. So I don't think, so it's not a lack of too much of appreciation, it's just that time is of the essence. So it's quite hard to agree on that when it's already difficult to agree on search terms, which you would think is a little bit more easier.
Sometimes not so much. I've got one more question in this area, and then I want to move on to a different topic. The question is, go ahead and take a look in your crystal ball. If today there is reticence on the part of regulators to use those more advanced sorts of technologies, predictive coding and other forms of artificial intelligence, what do you think it'll look like 1, 2, 3, 5 years in the future?
I would imagine that the regulators will be conducting their internal reviews of the data that they've been receiving from their clients, from the parties who are merging or they're investigating, even if it's a cartel. And I would predict they should now be sort of banking the knowledge and creating these models, their own internal models about, okay, this is what innovation looks like, the topics of, how we're going to enhance products, services into the market, or this is what a price war or a cartel or customer sharing, bid rigging information looks like. These are the examples that we have. And crystal ball, maybe in 5 years, we may actually see the law firm say, okay, we have a database with 3 million documents. And perhaps the regulator would say, okay, we want you to run this model, which is, a bundled up bit of text of previous examples and words and whatnot, and then ask them to assign it to their data set. And then they would need to provide the top 1,000 documents. I think the market is somewhat there now. We have certain tools. They may not be compatible with the different products on the market, but if we could have a standard way of implementing these models, then that could be done. So I think the regulator will start having this historical bank of information, and that will be turned into AI models that they will then implement on the data sets.
So now a different crystal ball. I've asked this of a couple of other guests before. If you could have your dream package, your dream platform, your dream technology capabilities for use with EDiscovery, for litigation and investigations, what would that look like?
Great question. If it's a dream, anything's possible. I would love to have the data sets sort of presented in a augmented reality way. So you could have these shapes and circles representing the data. It would be voice enabled, augmented reality. You could say, show me in a data set where the competition is mentioned, the names of the competitors in the market. They would come up, you would sort of be able to drag them over into a bucket. And then you would say, in that bucket, show me who the key actors are. And it would come up like with pictures, faces, and then you could sort of pick which ones you want. You could drag them into another bucket. And then within that bucket, you would then say, show me where the people have been acting in an aggressive nature. And you've sort of got these filters going on with the buckets, and then the documents would come up, and then you would say, okay, right, we're going to put them into a review batch. And then it sort of goes into a typical style document review exercise. But yeah, a dream, yeah, that would be the dream, to have a sort of a platform you could talk to, you could interact with, and really sort of cut up and carve the data.
So I've got this picture of you standing there in front of a screen that doesn't even exist, because you've got the Google glasses or whatever it is, and you are moving your hands around. And to an outside observer, they can't figure out what you're doing. But for you, you've got this three-dimensional universe of data in a structured fashion in front of you, where you are able to grab pieces, expand them out, compress them down, move them around, combine and recombine. That sounds like what you're talking about.
Yeah. A bit like the movie with Tom Cruise, which is probably almost 20 years ago, I guess now. But yeah, something crazy like that would be.
Well, it might be crazy, but it would be really cool, wouldn't it?
Well, I guess some of the technology is there, right? We do have some now that's able to detect stress and passive and aggressive tones in text. So it's just trying to package that up in a sort of an augmented reality way. But yeah, that would be my dream. If hopefully we may even see that one day.
Well, I will conclude that part with the same thing I've said to others. Let's see if we can make that happen, because wouldn't that be a lot of fun? Thanks, Luke. Luke Smith is with, do you go by LTI or Litigation Tech Innovations? Which do you prefer?
Yeah, Legal Tech Innovations is a bit long, so I've just cut it now to LTI, yes.
Okay, so Luke is founder, CEO, and head of customer delivery at LTI. Luke, thank you very much for joining us this week. And then next week, we will have with us Joy Morau, who is founder and CEO of Practice Aligned Resources. Luke, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Thank you very much.